All I needed was one yes.
This was like my only chance to make it into big tech.
Every day, 5 jobs, go.
The rating is useless.
Like I was nauseous. I was so embarrassed.
Don't expect that the interviewer would have gone through each and every GitHub link that you have mentioned on your resume.
Because you will need that conviction. Feel that in your bones. It is not an easy transition to make.
I only had experience working at a gas station.
And they're like, yeah, so, you just spent the last 3 months learning Ruby and JavaScript, like, good for you. Please go sit in a corner and learn Python. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Decided to show up in a suit because we were going to talk about interviews, and I thought it would be the perfect attire to be in a suit.
Today we're going to be talking about the entire hiring process. That is starting with resumes, interviewing, and ultimately landing the job. If you're new around here, hello, welcome, my name is Lou, and welcome to Open Up the Cloud. And in this video, I wanted to show you behind the scenes. I wanted to show you behind the curtain of how hiring managers think and how people ultimately get hired into the tech and the cloud industry. We'll talk about how to tell a story with your resume, why you should be messaging people as part of your outreach strategy, questions to ask employers in order to get good feedback. I actually found 5 people for today's video who either hire people into the cloud industry or got hired in the cloud industry. First up, we have Rishabh, formerly a DevOps engineer, now works as a developer advocate for Twilio and is even a lecturer in the cloud industry. Next up, we have Alessandro Cinelli, who goes by Chirpo. He's an engineering manager at Spotify. He's worked over 20 years in the tech industry, and he's coming to give us his experience as a hiring manager. Next up, we have Abhishek. He's a cloud engineer at Futurellis and an AWS community builder, also a hiring manager in the cloud industry. Next, we have Maria Laka. She's a full stack engineer who got into the tech industry quite recently, and she's here to share her ups, her downs, and all of the different things that she learnt going through the interview process. And finally, we have Alex Sieha. She is formerly a data scientist. She has been a software engineer, and she's currently a product manager. Now, I want to start with a word or a theme that I find myself saying all of the time, which is the word evidence. Now, I've also talked a lot about projects and the role that they play when it comes to getting into the cloud industry. Projects are work that you've built out yourself. You've built them and you can take them with you to interviews and you can talk about them and share some of the things that you've learnt throughout your learning journey when it comes to getting into the cloud industry. When you're starting out and you don't have a ton of experience on your resume, building evidence of your skills and ability is one of the most important things that you can be doing and spending your time on. Now, don't just take my word for it. Here we have Rishabh and Maria sharing some of this age-old advice that having evidence, having a real body of evidence that you can take with you to interviews can be really beneficial. So I'll hand you over to them just so you can hear what they have to say.
It's also interesting to see that they researched me pretty well. She knew about my YouTube. She knew about my presence on like Twitter and stuff too, like the blogs I posted about GCP. I think that shows that, they did their work, that she went thoroughly that if this candidate is eligible or not. Like I always find this helpful that I have projects that solved a problem in my life and I can talk to them. You can tell by a person's way of speaking if they were passionate about a project, and you can come up with these stories that will actually be way more relatable and convincing, whereas it can be hard to come up with stories for a project that is kind of a clone of something that you learned.
But yeah, I use GitHub. I tried to push code every day. I would do like multiple problems a day to make up for days I missed and then like backdate it. So I had like a solid green year almost. And then I used it also for projects. But I felt like if I had a good README on everything and I had like the green squares, like that was enough. And if they really want to dig around and ask me about a project, they can. I did Code Wars every day, so if you were to look at it, you would see that it's like very green for like a year, and that's Code Wars.
They're not necessarily going to look at your projects in detail, however they are going to dig in, maybe look at some of the languages used, get the general idea of what the project is that you have built, but ultimately it's when you come to the interview that it's your opportunity to then tell stories about the projects that you have built. Don't forget that one of the number one, if not the most important thing about your resume is that it must intrigue the interviewer. Using things like your projects can help intrigue the interviewer. They can show that you really have a passion for what you're doing and that you have a deep knowledge in the areas that you're looking into. And you can do that by showcasing your projects effectively on your resume. Now, on the topic of standing out in your resume, something that I've seen time and time again, or an opportunity that people seem to be leaving things on the table, is this summary that appears at the top of your resume. This can be a great opportunity to hook and to create intrigue for someone about your resume and to ultimately then want to bring you in to an interview and speak to you.
I find those types of summaries not useful when they don't tell me differentiating information. So like if you have a compelling story that helps you stand out, they can be incredibly powerful.
Now, I know a lot of people watching this will be like, story. What is my story? I don't have a story. I'm not interesting, or I don't know what story to tell about myself that could possibly intrigue an interviewer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you a couple of things that I think stand out, particularly when I'm reading resumes, that are compelling aspects that you could add in to your own story. Industry knowledge. Consistently downplayed. Let's say if you're coming from a different industry like sales, make sure to highlight some of the key transferable skills because those can really differentiate you from other candidates. Numbers can also tell stories. If you've got some number of experience in a specific industry, if you've got a number of certifications, if you learned something in a particularly short space of time, look for these interesting numbers in your past history because numbers themselves can tell stories. Leadership and team skills, consistently downplayed. If you've come from another industry where you've got existing leadership and team skills, absolutely call those out. Undoubtedly, those will help differentiate you. And finally, specialist knowledge. Go deep on one specific topic area, and you can call that out as part of your story. It doesn't matter if you've necessarily worked in that part of the industry before, but if there's something you've really been digging into when it comes to your own learning, that can go into your story, and that can be something that helps differentiate you as well. Now, Chirpo mentioned something in our conversation that had me smiling ear to ear, because it's something that comes up all the time when I'm talking to people about their resumes, and it has something to do with the way that technical skills are presented on your resume. Now, I don't want to spoil it, so what I'll do is I'll hand over to Chirpo so he can actually explain in more detail what he actually means.
I have challenges when I'm hiring people is that maybe they put the experience that they had, like I worked here, this was my role, blah, blah, blah. And then at some point you have like the list of the technologies. Well, my suggestion is not to put that at the bottom, okay? Is to put per every experience that you had, what are the technologies that you work with? Why? Because if you work for a web agency, for example, and you had experience there with AWS, which is still valuable, but probably the complexity and the domain is different compared to a global company or a bigger company where you had global services, because things can get more challenging. So it's always good to pair somehow, to link the technologies that you use in a specific experience, because that will give them more understanding.
Exactly, when you just list off a whole bunch of technology, it's hard to understand. Are you a specialist in the area? How deep have you gone on this specific topic? Now, of course, a lot of people will probably be wondering about certifications. Where do certifications come into the hiring journey? Now, Abhishek had some interesting insights to share about why exactly companies do like candidates with certifications and why, and what types of companies they are. So I'll hand you over to him so he can explain a bit more about that.
You can skip some of the question in the interviews because you know this person has already done 30 to 40 AWS services, knows a bit about what load balancing, auto scaling, another relevant AWS concepts are, the cloud concepts are. If you are aware about the APN partner program that AWS runs, if you want to go from, let's say, advanced partner to the premium partner level, along with the competencies that your teammates have, they also need to have certain level of certification and certain counts of certification.
And while certifications do help as part of the process, remember that they are not a silver bullet, and they are just one of many different forms of evidence that you can showcase to employers. Think about all the different evidence that you're providing as well, like projects, open source work, potentially freelance work. I commonly hear from people as well that they are shocked when they find out so many different job descriptions have requesting 3, 4, 5+ years of experience. Now, quite frankly, this can be intimidating, and it also can be incredibly deflating to see that. Recruiters write those descriptions, and that's why they have those years of experience. It does mean that for some of those employers, they are willing to be flexible and they will still take you to an interview.
Let's say that you're hiring for a platform engineer, maybe coming and you are working with your company is working mainly with GCP. We know the vast majority is on AWS, right? So what shall I do? Shall I just not take candidates that don't have AWS experience? Hold on. No, maybe it's still okay, also because it gives you a different perspective.
Exactly. So that's something just to keep in mind, is just to try and not get discouraged by some of these big years of experience barriers and still put in applications for those jobs if you're hitting most of the requirements there anyway. When it comes to applying, you're going to have to apply to a lot of jobs. It's not going to be the case that you apply for one job and then you land the job immediately. Apply to different roles that you might not think that you could necessarily do or might require a little bit of learning on your side. Because it's so common, it's incredibly common with people that I talk to who are successful, is that they took a role that maybe was slightly different to the role that they were originally intending, but then they learnt on the job and they improved, and in many cases that actually became something that they really enjoyed doing. And this was a story from both Maria and Alex, where they both ended up taking opportunities that maybe weren't their first or initial choice.
I know what it came to. I applied for a back-end role, and what happened is they had 3 final candidates, and I asked about it, of course, and I was one of the 3 final ones. And they sent everyone like a back-end assessment, and then they decided that they wanted someone that also knew front end. So they sent also a front end assessment, and I was like, oh my God, I applied for a back end job. Like, how can you expect me to do this? Very upset about it. And then I did it and I got hired because I was the only one that could complete both. And I think that is actually what I see other people who are very like choosy about applying, and that sort of holds back that process, I think, a little bit. If you're really trying to get in for the first time, I would say just go.
And I'll never forget, I got to my final interview and our head of engineering was like, so unfortunate news, like this role, like we've decided to like discontinue this specific like growth engineering role. And I was like, oh no. You can imagine, right? Like the last interview. And he's like, well, but like we enjoyed talking to you so much, like how do you feel about being a front-end web developer? I was like, oh boy. And that was like the moment of like building of skills and worming my way into adjacent spaces, like really started to break, because I'm like, I do not have, professional JavaScript experience. I have never built, for a front end. Walking into a larger company with established dev practices, like that was like the new, like everything new. But yeah, as soon as I got there, I realized like, yeah, there are just so many things you can lean upon. I promise you'll be able to like find an impact regardless of the role.
Okay, so quick plug, if you're enjoying this video, please do like it and also consider subscribing. I'm putting out videos about how to get into the tech industry and the cloud industry with as much detail and sort of just honesty as I can. Now, whilst I'm saying that you should apply broadly and keep an open mind, the thing is that you are going to face a lot of rejection. That is a fact. There are going to be employers that ghost you or don't get back to you, recruiters that don't respond. Now, Maria had some great advice for this as well in terms of how she learned to deal with rejection herself.
I think when I initially was applying for jobs, I took it too personally. And I got really excited about things, and then like I'd be like devastated, and but I learned from that. For me, part of the process was really getting over the initial rejection, and then you stop caring. At least for me, I just was like, okay, I've had enough phone calls, after which I felt like I was nauseous. I was so embarrassed or like self-conscious. And then, for me, part of the process was like by just applying indiscriminately, I could get over that barrier of feeling like an idiot or out of my element and embrace it. And I try not to say no to myself for other people. Like if I just apply, they can say no to me, but they could also say yes.
And I just love what Maria had to say here as well. Like, just not taking it too personally about specific applications and just seeing the whole process as a learning journey. Each time you can just inch forward bit by bit, pushing further in the process. If you're not making it to interviews, making it to an interview and then making it to second rounds and all the way through to the end of the process. Just keep trying to make learnings that's going to push you a little bit further each time. Now, whilst we're on this topic of applying, I want to talk about this idea of sort of non-conventional ways of getting in touch with employers. Now, the thing is, if you're new or you're lacking experience, quite likely the best way to convince an employer to bring you to interview or ultimately hire you is by getting in front of them and getting a chance for them to see you, to speak to you, to talk to you, to ultimately hear your story as opposed to what you have on paper. Sometimes your resume, your LinkedIn, etc. could be disqualifying you early.
How I approached it on LinkedIn, every job I applied to, if I got an interview, I would find the engineer or developer that had most recently joined the company, and I would send them a message and say, hey, I'm interviewing to be a whatever at your company, and I saw that you joined recently. What made you excited about joining this company? Like, you know, why did you want to join? Because I genuinely want to know that, actually. Like, what makes another developer want to work here? I did talk to the engineer where I work now, and then he ended up interviewing me in both rounds of interviews. So I think that helped also, because I had already built a connection, and you know, it's just asking a question like, what are you excited about? What?
If you like the recruiter first call and you think they did a very good job, and you are really interested in the position, also try to build like some sort of a relationship with the recruiter. It's gonna not last that much, right? Because if things were going fine, probably you're gonna have a chat with the recruiter for 3 or 4 weeks, no more than that usually. Try to be kind, because if you want that job, you will be more successful if you start also taking a relationship with the recruiter from the start.
And I think it's little tips like this that actually really add up. You know, by actually getting in touch with people, for pushing, asking for feedback, you know, following up on things. If someone doesn't get back to you, follow up with them. I'm not saying that you should spam people, but don't be afraid to follow up and ask questions. And, you know, if you don't hear back from someone, then just, you know, send an additional message, just reach out again. So then we also probably should talk about technical assessments. Now, if you're applying for any form of technical job, there will probably be some form of technical assessment. That could be a coding interview, that could be pair programming, that could be through a coding platform, it could be systems design, it could be algorithms, that kind of thing as well. It really depends on the employer and what their specific setup is.
The sort of spectrum of technical assessments is so crazy. Like, they can be non-existent. It can be like build a button in React, or it can be like solve 3 DSA problems in 20 minutes, and they have to be really fast also. Like, your solutions have to run fast.
But a lot of companies have started this new trend where they allow you to go through a test assessment. You solve this many coding questions or you this many MCQs. Although a lot of people cheat on this, they will be asking you questions about the test in the interviews. So if you have cheated or not given it properly, you will be out in the first round itself. So definitely invest your time, valuable time, into coding, because other technical stuff like cloud and all can be taught, but I feel some aspects of the coding has to be learned the hard way.
For system design, yes, you'll get better with experience, but for folks that are just starting out, yes, read white papers that are out there, read architecture diagrams. There are really good YouTubers that are making system design videos on like how WhatsApp work or how payment processing work. With DevOps roles, they usually test your readability of the code. So they'll present you with like a repo that already exists, and they'll be like, oh, tell me what this function does. Like, every company does it differently. So like, don't just quote me on this and go and be like, oh, a DevOps interviewer will always ask about readability of the code and not an actual coding challenge. There are companies that might say, hey, we want to do a data structures and algorithms interview with you, and you'll be coming back at me saying, hey, Rishabh said there's no data structures. So yeah, it can be different. I have not had the chance to interview for a DevOps role that asked me data structures and algorithms.
And that's the thing, when it comes to things like technical assessments, really what it means to get good at these is often just repetition. is you're going to these different interviews and taking some of these technical assessments away and then doing them. You'll start to understand the different forms that you have of technical assessment and how to get good at passing them. But it really just comes a lot of time down to repetition and practice. Now, for a lot of you out there, you probably don't have a ton of experience. So you're probably wondering, what is it? What is the special sauce? What is the reason that employers might hire someone with less experience? So I wanted to ask some of the guests today what it was when they have hired people with less experience in the past that really stood out to them as individuals and made them hire them in the first place, so that you could potentially copy some of these attributes as well and bring that into some of your own application process.
But we were looking for one specific skill, that is communication. Because we think that if you can communicate well, you can work well with us. The technical part can be learned. Let's say if you know at least 3 out of 5 in Python, if you rate yourself that much, or maybe 2.5, that's pretty much enough for us. If you're not able to write a logic right now, that's completely fine. But you should be able to convey your thought that, hey, this is what's happening with me. This is what I'm thinking. This is how I'll be implementing this code. And this is how it works. So if you are able to communicate well, I think you are on the right path. And I can say like it's 100% success for us because these people really turned out to be great engineers.
The best performing people that I had in my career were the people not because they were very strong in a specific technology, but it was the motivation that they had, and that's the key. If they want something, they want to work on something because there's a really desire. That's 80% of the job, because you know that somehow they're gonna make it because they want to make it themselves. No one told them. They want to achieve that.
Now, interestingly, everyone I spoke to gave the same answer here, which is communication and passion. So it's not just about how much you know, but it's also about things like trajectory and the passion that you show for learning and improving. Those were the critical factors and the things that came up time and time again as what stood out for a less experienced candidate. And this loops back around to what we mentioned at the start, which is building that evidence, write blogs, build projects, work on your LinkedIn, get active online. And that's going to show the interview that you're really hungry and driven in order to get this opportunity. Okay, so that's pretty much everything that I have for this particular video. However, I do have one more thing for you, so just stick around for a second. But if you're looking for another video to watch and you're thinking about taking a role as an architect in the cloud, go ahead and watch this video where I talk about the solutions architect role and why it might not be exactly the role that you think it is. Thank you for watching, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you around, and I look forward to sharing your I Got the Job post. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.
Like you are ready. Us sitting here on this call and telling you that you're ready is probably not going to make an impact, but do what you need to do.
It takes one person to take a chance at you, even though you might have bombed a few interviews.
I just need one yes, which some random person on Twitter said to me, so thank you to that person.
You don't often have Rishabh showing up in a suit.